Whoopsie daisy. I went to Portland and I did not stream because I was having so much fun. But I'm back. Also, I felt like I should recommend my favorite if you need like a casual meal when you do not want to spend more than 5 minutes preparing. I have a recommendation for you, and it is this brand of ramen. It's on Amazon. I think they cost like 60 cents for a pack. And I've been eating them. I don't know. I try to limit myself to not have them every day, so like every other. But they're so good. I could probably have them like for 2 meals a day and still be happy. Anyway, back to Bobby. Let's see what Bobby's been up to. Okay, and it looks like where we left. Well, last time we were talking about his family and how he was a good dad and seemingly not a great guy to his wife. And now we're talking about basically he has teased at a tunnel fight that's about to begin. And that's where I left off on page 610. Thwarted by LaGuardia in one attempt to grab more power, Moses made another only to have the mayor thwart him again. Money, as Moses was well aware, was a key to power. But by 1938, the great wellspring of federal work relief money, I have the hiccups now. The great wellspring of federal relief money at which he had been drinking for 5 years was almost dry. A new spring had begun welling out of Washington and Albany, however. Moses set out to bottle it right under LaGuardia's nose. Its sources were the U.S. Housing Act of 1937, co-sponsored by Representative Henry B. Stegall of Alabama and Al Smith's old Albany buddy, U.S. Senator Robert F. Wagner. Wow, that's a name that I believe is going to be relevant again because I think he became the mayor of New York City. And a New York State constitutional amendment approved in 1938. Okay, there's money now. Prior to passage of the Wagner-Stegall Act, Moses had never had much interest in public housing. Public housing meant, in the terms of the day, housing exclusively for the poor. Moses had never had the slightest interest in building anything for the poor. Also, he did italics on anything. But the amount given by the Wagner-Stegall Act, together with the subsequent congressional amendment in 1938 to the newly created U.S. Housing Authority for loans to local municipal authorities was $800 million. The amount the state constitutional amendment authorized the legislature to make available to local housing authorities was $300 million. Obviously, public housing was going to be a great new, perhaps the great new, source of outside money for the city. Hastily recruiting architects from the State Housing Board, Moses sent them to work secretly drawing up a public housing program for New York and himself secretly drew up a proposal for reorganization of the City Housing Authority, under which the authority would be reorganized right out of existence and replaced with a board consisting of himself and 6 other members, 4 of whom he believed he, rather than the mayor, could control. All right, let's go. A new board to be on. I hope that they make Stuytown. I just talked to when I was in Portland, I met someone that lives in Stuytown, which, okay, the whole shtick that everyone always talks about is like, yeah, Stuytown, it was built to be this utopia for the middle class, like it's affordable, blah, blah, blah. But apparently that was just like the dream, and it was like that for a while, but now it has been sold to a private company that cares a lot less about making it a middle-class haven. If you haven't been, it's like Stuytown. It takes up a bunch of city blocks. Like you can see it on an aerial map of the city. It's on the Lower East Side. And yeah, it's kind of like more of a community. Like there's like playgrounds and there's just a bunch of buildings around and all the buildings look the same. And there's like an ice skating rink in between the buildings. It's just like this whole it's like if there was an area half the size of Central Park, but it was all like a planned community. But it's maybe smaller than half Central Park. Anyway. Okay. The mayor possessed an intense private interest in public housing. Fiorello LaGuardia believed that it had been the dampness and congestion of the tenements in which she had been raised that had given his beloved first wife the tuberculosis that had killed her and their baby. He had vowed to friends that the one thing he was going to do personally as mayor was to make sure the city started at last to give poor people in the city a decent, healthy place to live. Fun fact, did you know that tenements, like the definition of a tenement is almost identical? Oh, sorry, that was scary. The definition of tenement is the same as the definition of apartment, but it was like around the time that there was a ton of immigration, like the 1910s and 20s, where more wealthy people in New York were like, well, we don't want to call our homes tenements because tenements were in the newspapers for being filthy, and so they just borrowed the French word apartment. And now tenement is like a historical term for the overcrowded places. I learned that at the Tenements Museum where I went last week. It was really fun. But it costs $30, so just know that if you go. But I think it was worth it. But if I hadn't been in a good mood, it wouldn't have been worth it. The vast amounts of money and power that were obviously going to be involved made LaGuardia even more determined to keep the program firmly in his own hands. So Moses drew up his proposal in absolute secrecy and presented it not to the mayor, but in a bold attempt to circumvent him, to influential private citizens. The very day after voters approved the constitutional amendment, he persuaded several real estate and reform organizations to jointly rent the auditorium in the Museum of Natural History for an evening 10 days later, and to invite several hundred key realtors and reformers to hear him give a speech. And he arranged to bring the program dramatically to the public at the same time by persuading WNYC, the city-owned radio station, which at the time boasted a considerable audience, I think it still does, to carry the speech live. Okay, this is fun that he's doing it at the museum. All Moses's previous public works had been basically concerned with recreation and parks and with the means, roads and bridges, of getting people to parks. He may have realized that without protective coloration, his attempts to move into a new unrelated field would look like the bare-faced power grab that it was. So he gave it protective coloration. He titled his speech Housing and Recreation, and in asking realtors and reformers to sponsor his speech and WNYC to broadcast it, he told them it was merely a discussion of coordination of public housing and parks. Nobody in the audience suspected the truth, even such intimates of the mayor as Adolph Burrell and Paul Windels. Applauding with the rest of the audience as the park commissioner strode briskly on stage, had no inkling of what was coming until Moses's aides began passing out attractive four-color brochures, and opening them, they saw in amazement that Moses was proposing in detail 10 projects. Oh, they saw what he was proposing in detail. 10 projects were proposed, sites specific down to precise boundary lines, costs of land and construction for each already figured. A complete new housing program. The unifying principle behind the proposal was spelled out. Only genuine slum clearance on the large scale would make a real dent in the city's housing problem. So LaGuardia's efforts to rehabilitate old tenements should be scrapped. Whole blocks of slum tenements should be razed to the ground and replaced with new housing. Only genuine slum dwellers should be allowed in the project. And to ensure this, tenements should be selected by the welfare commissioner. The financing was worked out. The program would cost $245 million, and it should be financed by large-scale government subsidy, $200 million from state and federal funds, and a sales tax on cigarettes to raise the balance. It should not be financed, as had been proposed, by an increase in the city's real estate tax, for the real estate tax was too high in the city already. Staring at each other in disbelief, two officials realized that they were witnessing a public relations blitzkrieg, a lightning-like move by Moses to mobilize the opinion of the public in general and of the influentials in the audience in particular. His opposition to a real estate tax increase was a clever move to ensure the support of the city's powerful real estate lobby. Sometimes he puts like parentheses in places, and I can't remember what was happening before, but behind his plan so that the mayor would not be able to overrule it. If you're just coming, Robert Moses just staged a little party where it was in the Museum of Natural History and it was broadcast on the radio. And surprise, at his thing, there's a talk, and he has this plan for like a $245 million 10 housing development plan. So that's happening. Oh, and it's crazy because the mayor LaGuardia really wanted to be the one that was designing all this, but Robert Moses just staged this event and unveiled the plans. But a copy of the brochure had that afternoon somehow fallen into LaGuardia's hands, and the mayor had summoned WNYC director Morris S. Novick to his office. I think Pearl's looking at, oh, hi, did you hear my name? Did you hear your name? I don't know. I think she's looking at traffic. There's nothing, there aren't any birds. Usually she's looking at birds, but there are no birds right now. Unaware of this, Moses had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss when he began speaking. As he spoke, there right in front of him, attached to the lectern, was a WNYC microphone, and, looking down below the stage, Moses could see two WNYC technicians sitting at a table full of broadcasting paraphernalia, busily twiddling dials and going through all the motions of technicians making a broadcast. When they saw him glancing down at them, in fact, they made him a thumbs-up signal to indicate that all was going well. One of Moses' secretaries, however, was attempting to pick up the program at home. Unable to do so, or to locate WNYC at all, she finally realized that the station was off the air. She managed to telephone Alan Jennings backstage at the museum. And Alan is spelled Allyn, which is kind of fun. I wouldn't really expect that spelling 100 years ago. Rushing over to the technicians, the Moses aide, Alan Jennings, asked what was going on. They assured him with straight faces that the program was on the air. Running outside to his car, Jennings turned on the radio, dialed WNYC, got only silence, and realized that the technicians must be deliberately fooling him. Running back into the auditorium, he handed up a note to his boss just as he was coming to the end of his speech. The park commissioner, who had believed that he had been speaking for the past 45 minutes to tens of thousands of New Yorkers, learned that he had been speaking to only 200, the 200 right in front of him. The WNYC microphone in front of him was dead. Someone must have ordered WNYC to cut his program off the air, and must have ordered the technicians to go through all the motions necessary to conceal this fact from him. And glaring down at them, as they made still another thumbs-up gesture, he realized that only one man would have thought of that touch. That son of a bitch had outsmarted him again. LaGuardia. Dun, dun, dun. LaGuardia may have been able to keep Moses from reaching the public's ears, but the mayor could do nothing about the public's eyes. The next day, his park commissioner's plan was on page 1 of every newspaper in the city, with support for that plan on virtually every editorial page. But the mayor, using all his power and all of his cunning, cut Moses out of the public housing picture as completely as he had cut him off the air. The arena in which the initial confrontation took place was an 11-member committee the mayor had formed some months before, and to which, not suspecting Moses' designs, he had appointed him to advise him on public housing. Moses attempted to persuade the committee members to endorse at least some of his proposals, but LaGuardia, working through Wendell's, the committee's chair, Wendell's is always just there. Like, Wendell's is never doing anything. I still am not sure what Wendell's even does. Like, he's always just sitting there. I'm sure he did a lot of stuff, but I swear, every time we hear about Wendell's, it's just that he was there or that he said something. That's my take. But I'm sure he actually did do things. Anyway, working through Wendell's, the committee's chairman made sure that they didn't endorse Moses' proposals by employing relentless pressure. Wendell's would decline years later to furnish any details of the infighting. But I'll tell you this, he said. When it came to things like that, LaGuardia was as hard and as shrewd as they come. Whatever it was necessary to do, he did. The committee declined to recommend a single one of Moses' proposed sites or any diminution, I don't know how to say that word aloud, that's one that I only read, or any diminution whatever in the powers of the LaGuardia appointed and dominated city housing authority. LaGuardia handled all negotiations with Federal Housing Authority Chairman Nathan Strauss personally. He made all announcements of new projects from his own office, and in general made sure that Moses never knew what new public housing project was being planned until the planning was completed and the necessary federal funds allocated. Moses raged, publicly assailing the secret, surreptitious program, but he could not budge the mayor. By the end of 1941, 13 separate public housing structures in New York, far more than in any 13 separate public housing projects containing a total of more than 17,000 apartments had been constructed in New York, far more than in any other city in America, and Moses had nothing to do with any of them. 17,000 apartments is a lot. That is no joke. Kamala keeps talking about building, 3 million housing for 3 million families? I don't know. I listened to the Daily podcast this morning, and so it's not like I'm obsessively following the federal economic plans of the candidates, just trying to follow them the normal amount. The mayor was even able to indulge himself in an additional, I don't even know how to say this word either. It's spelled soupcon, but with the Portuguese type C. This is embarrassing that I don't know how to say that. In an additional soupcon of personal satisfaction. The printing bill for the 4-color brochure Moses had distributed at the Museum of Natural History was more than $1,000. When Moses submitted the bill to Comptroller McGoldrick, the mayor smilingly told the comptroller, "A beautiful printing job," and ordered him not to pay it. Okay, so that means that Moses probably ended up having to pay for his papers. That's fine. The tunnel and housing fights convinced LaGuardia, according to Windell's, he's just there again, Kern, Burrell, and other top mayoral assistants, that his park commissioner was intent on increasing his personal power. And LaGuardia, determined to concentrate power in the city in his own hands, acted as he would have acted toward any rival. The unifying motive behind Moses' actions in both fights was his desire to expand his power. In the tunnel fight, to attain power to build not just bridges, but all interborough crossings. In the housing fight, to extend his power hitherto limited in the field of parks and transportation into a wholly new field of governmental endeavor. LaGuardia kept Moses' power confined within its traditional spheres. Following the tunnel and housing fights, moreover, the mayor began to re-examine the implications of the virtually unlimited power he had given Moses within those traditional spheres, and to conclude that the power should be curbed in those spheres too. This was not, according to the mayor's top aides, a wholly new feeling. They've always been beefing. For some time, they say, he had been becoming worried about aspects of Moses' park policy, the same aspects, in general, that were worrying reformers like Exton and Weinberg. If he had not are those the two guys that really loved the parks up in the Bronx? I think they are. Also, remember LaGuardia and Robert Moses, there are so many details of their beef in here. They constantly are butting heads. So this is not really new. This was not, according to the mayor's top aides, a wholly new feeling, blah, blah, blah. If he, I think LaGuardia, had not discerned before precisely what those policies meant for those of the city's peoples who most needed the parks, he was beginning to discern it now. Windell's recalls the mayor raging when he realized that the prices Moses' concessionaires were charging at the such new city-built or refurbished park restaurants as the Tavern on the Green. I went there the first time I visited New York City when I was a child and I was in middle school, and my parents said, "Annie, what do you want to do in the city? You get to choose the activity one afternoon." And I just Googled before we even went. I was in 7th grade. I Googled, where do you see celebrities in New York? And that was the restaurant. And so my parents were like, okay, but it's in Central Park. So it was fun. It wasn't that much of a dud, but we just sat there and ate. At the time, I remember thinking they were super expensive. They were probably $10, soft pretzels. And my dad got a beer and it was fun. And we didn't see any celebrities, but I tried. Anyway, and that's just the story of my, of me in 7th grade. Okay, okay, the prices that the concessionaires were charging at the restaurants, okay, Tavern on the Green and the Claremont Inn, the prices were so high that they could not be used regularly by poor or even middle-class families. In transportation, LaGuardia had had a vague feeling ever since the beginning of his mayoralty uh, that the great road building projects must be accompanied by corresponding improvements in mass transportation. But because he admired Moses's parkways and bridges, he had not pressured the commissioner to include provision for mass transport on them. But as new parkways and bridges became jammed as quickly as they opened, the vague feelings hardened. By 1939, LaGuardia would be pressing Moses hard indeed as to why he was not paying more attention to the suggestions of the Regional Plan Association. And beyond questions of parks and transportation, the mayor had for some time been becoming progressively more aware of the question that a later generation would call priorities. By 1938, he was acutely aware that the great strides made in parks and parkways were not being matched in any other areas of public works, not even in areas like schools and hospitals in which the need was desperate. His feelings about Moses had steadily and gradually but substantially changed by the time I resigned as Corporation Counsel in 1937, says Windells. He still felt he had matchless abilities and energies, but he also felt now that those abilities and energies must be channeled in the right direction if the city was to benefit from them. Now, with the mayor's feelings intensified by the tunnel and housing fights, he was worried about how much power Moses had in the city, Kern says. I know because he kept talking about it. He felt Moses's power must be reduced. These feelings really become very strong, and this analysis of the mayor's feelings was documented by the mayor's actions. In November 1938, shortly after Moses's museum speech, he cut from the list of WPA projects at least two large park projects he had earlier promised Moses he would include. In December, LaGuardia stood up to him and the New York Times with a new firmness in cutting the park department's budget request. Early in 1939, the mayor made it clear to Newbold Morris and Joseph McGoldrick, his Board of Estimate allies, that they were to take a harder line on Moses's requests to the board. But by 1939, the mayor's feelings were not to be nearly as crucial to Moses as they had been in the past. To a large extent, in fact, he no longer had to concern himself with such feelings. To a large extent, it no longer mattered to him what the mayor thought. Of all the remarkable qualities of Robert Moses's matchless mind, one of the most striking was its ability to take an institution with little or no power and, seemingly with little or no potential for more power, at Yale, an unprestigious literary magazine, in state government, the Long Island State Park Commission, and to transform it into an institution with immense power, power insulated from and hence on a par with the power of the forces that had originally created it. And now the mind of Robert Moses had begun focusing on the institution known as the public authority. That's the end of the chapter. Pearl's still enjoying the window, but now she's not looking at anything. Pearl, what do you think about that? That chapter, I feel like it was kind of it was a chapter that set us up for action, but we didn't really get a lot of action in there. Really, the only good action was when he made the speech and he thought he was on the radio, and then all the aides, the WNYC staffers were like, "Yeah, no, we're yeah, we're live. It's a live wire," and they were lying. That's kind of cool. I'm charging my computer, and then I'm gonna start the next chapter. The next one's called The Warp on the Loom. That's one of the more interesting chapter titles. Kind of like, what was it? The King of Cauliflower or whatever? Okay. The Warp on the Loom, chapter 28, and we're starting with two quotes and they're quotes from laws. This is the first quote. No state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts, from the Constitution of the United States of America, Article 1, Section 10. The next quote is, the authority shall have power to make contracts. Okay, so, and that's from a different law from New York. Wow, that's actually crazy. Okay, so Robert Caro is very clearly being like uh Robert Moses's Robert Moses's law was unconstitutional. Okay, the public authority was not a new device. The first of these entities that resembled private corporations but were given powers hitherto reserved for governments, powers to construct public improvements, and, in order to pay off the bonds they sold to finance the construction, to charge the public for the use of the improvements, had been created in England during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. That hold on, I need to Google when the first Queen Elizabeth one. Okay. She lived from 1533 to 1603, and she was the queen from 1558 until her death in 1603. And she's the only surviving child of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. See, these are the sorts of things I definitely have known at some point, but it's just nice to get a refresher. Okay, so people have been constructing public works and then charging tolls or whatever since then. By the time Robert Moses went to Oxford 300 years later, there were 1,800 such part public, part private bodies in England, including the huge Port of London Authority, named Authority because the clauses in the Act of Parliament that spelled out its powers began with the words, "Authority is hereby given," and highway building boards whose roads were named turnpikes because they were blocked with horizontal bars, pikes, set into revolving pillars that would be turned aside to let a carriage pass only after the toll was paid. Wow, turnpikes. That is very interesting. That's very I need to make sure I'm putting a star so I remember that. I love figuring out where things come from. Like I recently put together that if you're like I'm just spitballing here, basically spitballs like spit on the ball and pitch it in baseball, that got banned in like the 1920s or maybe even earlier. So if you're just spitballing, you're just kind of like throwing the ball around, but it's not an official throw because that's not allowed. Right? I don't know. I just remembered that spitballs were a real thing, and so I figured that was probably the etymology, but yeah. But the public authority concept was new in the US. There may or may not, there exists no reliable history of authorities. There may or may not have been a few collecting tolls on rural roads. Hearing rumors of one in North Carolina, Jimmy Walker contemplating setting one up in New York to enrich his friends. Classic Jimmy Walker. But at the time Moses went to Oxford, the only urban authorities in existence on the western side of the Atlantic were a bare handful set up to build small water supply systems. The Port of New York Authority, the first large authority in America, modeled on its London counterpart and created by an interstate compact between New York and New Jersey, would not be created until 1921. Wait, so that was the Port of New York Authority. It was created in 1921. It would not float its first bond issue until 1926 and would not become financially successful until 1931, when, after 5 years of near fiscal disaster, it would persuade the two states to let it take over the highly successful Holland Tunnel, which had been constructed by an independent commission. Oh, lucky me. Okay, so whenever we have a massive footnote, it's often really good. And the thing about the Holland Tunnel being constructed by an independent commission, so we're footnoting now. Moses had played a small but significant role in the Holland Tunnel's construction. One of his first, remember when the Holland Tunnel was designed by a guy named Mr. Holland? That was a fun highlight of the last time I read. Okay, one of the first assignments for Al Smith was to analyze two conflicting construction proposals. The commission's plan to build the tunnel by conventional methods at a cost it estimated at $28 million, and General George W. Gothel's plan to build it by a new method at a cost Gothel's estimated at $12 million. The young reformer, Moses, unequipped with the slightest practical experience in construction, interviewed the famed builder of the Panama Canal and gave Smith his verdict. A great personality, a go-getter, but neither a great engineer nor a financier. Equally unimpressed with the commission's engineers, he talked with independent experts and concluded and told the governor that the Goethals plan would not work, and that while the commissions would, the cost would be not 28 but 48 million. Smith's reaction, Moses was to recall, introduced me to his extraordinary head for facts and figures and his immense loyalty to his assistants, no matter how green, young, and new at the game. Ignoring protests, the governor threw out the Goethals plan and accepted the commissions, but allocated it for the 48 million that Moses had suggested. The actual cost turned out to be 49 million. That's so crazy that the builder of the Panama Canal was like, yeah, I can do this for 12. And then Moses was like, yeah, maybe not. We're going to do the $48 million option. Okay, so we're back to the Holland Tunnel. It was not until the New Deal, when depression-strapped municipalities, unable to finance major public works themselves, suddenly realized that RFC and PWA grants were available for self-liquidating projects, that urban authorities began to be established in any number. By 1933 and 34, or in 1933 and 34, when Moses was playing the crucial role in setting up the Triborough, Bethpage, Jones Beach, Henry Hudson, Marine Parkway, and Hayden Planetarium authorities, and a lesser but still key role in the creation of I need to get better at talking. Played a lesser but still key role in the creation of 7 other authorities. There were only a few handfuls of other authorities in the entire country. Okay, so he's in his authority era. With the lone exception of the Port Authority, moreover, every public authority created in the United States had been created in a single pattern. Each had been established to construct and operate one and only one public improvement, a single isolated bridge or tunnel or sewer system, to issue only enough bonds to pay for the construction of that improvement, and only bonds with a fixed expiration date. And when that date arrived, or sooner if revenue was collected faster than expected, to pay off the bonds, to eliminate all tolls or fees, turn the improvement over to the city, and go out of existence. The Port Authority, empowered to operate several improvements, had become America's first multi-purpose public authority. But each of its projects fit the traditional pattern, since each was financed by a separate bond issue, and both authority members and public officials expected that as soon as each issue was paid off, the tolls on the facility financed by that issue would be eliminated. Because the facilities would thereafter belong to not one but 2 states, there were plans to have them run by bi-state commissions with members appointed by both legislatures. Okay, awesome. Thanks for that footnote detail. Motivated by the failure of several Port Authority projects to earn enough to meet the interest and amortization payments on their bonds, the authority's brilliant general counsel, Julius Henry Cohen, was attempting in 1934 to break new ground by devising a new kind of bond and persuading bankers who held the authority's outstanding bonds to accept the new one in their place. Okay, so he's like, I know we already owe you money, but please give us more in a new way. Under the plan Cohen had in mind, the individual bond issues would be combined into a single general issue supported by the revenues from all Port Authority enterprises, a move which would allow use of the Holland Tunnel surpluses to bail out such money losers as its 2 bridges connecting Staten Island with New Jersey. And since the new issue would be open-ended, the authority could use any overall surplus to finance new projects. The bankers refused to consider open-end bonds for unspecified new projects, but in 1935 did agree to a consolidation of outstanding bonds in a general and refunding bond that could be used for one new project. The proposed Lincoln Tunnel, they're combining the bonds and they're using them for the proposed Lincoln Tunnel. And it was this bond, rather than any devised by Moses, that was the first bond issue in the United States secured not by a single public improvement, but by an authority's general revenues. I feel like I understand about 80, 70 to 80% of that last paragraph, but I'm just moving on. But Moses went much further. Originally, he had conceived of his authorities in the traditional mold. The legislation he had drafted, establishing the Triborough, Henry Hudson, and Marine Parkway bodies, for example, had explicitly authorized each to construct only a single specified project and to issue bonds only for that project. The bonds were to be paid off as soon as possible, and not only was a time limit, 40 years, set on their expiration, but that time limit also limited the authority's life. As soon as its bonds were paid off, it was to go out of existence and turn over its bridge to the city government. The legislators who had created Robert Moses' authorities and the mayor who, under the state constitution, had to ask the legislators to create them, had conceived of them as mere creatures of the sovereign city. Legislators and mayor, as well as the city's citizens, continually reminded by the press of the long tradition that all its bridges be toll-free, had been assured that the tolls would be removed forever as soon as their costs had been paid for, and there had been no deliberate attempt to mislead them. Robert Moses had thought of public authorities as men had always thought of public authorities. New paragraph. But Robert Moses' thinking was changing. The primary factor behind this change was money. The carrying charges, interest, and amortization on the $5,100,000 in bonds that had been sold to pay for the Henry Hudson Bridge were about $370,000 per year, a sum that could be collected at 10 cents per car from 3,700,000 cars. But the number of drivers handing their dimes to the bridge toll collectors was not 3,700,000. In 1938, it was 10,300,000. In 1939, 12,700,000. And maintenance costs on bridges were, Moses was learning, gratifyingly minimal. Painting the entire Henry Hudson, for example, cost only $18,000. And painting was needed only once in 4 years. The salaries of toll collectors, the only operating personnel required, totaled less than $50,000 a year. Our bridge was fabulously successful, Jack Madigan would say. We were earning, after the carrying charges, $600,000 per year net. 3 exclamation points. Okay. And that was just one bridge. The Triborough, on which the annual carrying charges were about $1,800,000, but on which the toll was 25 cents for cars and more for trucks, was by 1938 earning per year net, 3 exclamation points, $1,300,000. More significantly still, on all Moses' bridges, the traffic volume for each month was higher than the volume for the corresponding month the previous year. Clearly, volume and revenue was going to be far higher than even those fabulous figures. Under the laws creating the authorities, the bills that Robert Moses himself had drafted on his yellow legal notepads, unexpectedly high revenues could only be used in one way: to retire an authority's bonds faster than scheduled, to speed the date when the authority would go out of existence, and to turn its bridges back to the city. With surpluses of such unprecedented size, the bonds of Moses' authorities would be retired very fast indeed. At the rate the Henry Hudson Bridge was making money, for example, its cost would be amortized not in 40 years, but in 10, perhaps 9 or 8. In a decade or less, the bridge that the city had never been able to finance would have been built by Robert Moses, built and paid for, to stand for centuries to a great free public improvement for its citizens. Using the surpluses in the way required by law would therefore make the Henry Hudson Bridge and the Triborough spectacular successes, all the more spectacular in a city in which public works always seem to cost the public more, not less, than anticipated. But this was not the kind of success in which Moses, obsessed by accomplishment and power, was interested. Money, revenue, surpluses was the key to accomplishment and power, but only if he could keep it and use it. It was of no use to him if he had to give it to bankers as fast as he got it. It was of no use to him if, as soon as he had paid off the bankers, he had to surrender control of his bridges. Money was of use to him only if, in other words, he was able to use the bridge surpluses for other purposes than bond paying, and if he was able to keep control of the bridges instead of turning them over to the city. And under the law, that was impossible. But what if the law was changed? What if in some way he was able to keep the money? I'm going to stop there. Exciting times. This is a long chapter, I think. Let's see. Very long. Super long. Okay, yeah, we have 18 more pages of this, and then it's section 6, the lust of power. The lust for power, excuse me. See you later. Sorry that I took a long time off. It was because I was in Portland at a conference. It was called XOXO. It was very fun. See you later. Have a good day.